Hello, welcome to the next episode of the Powerless Podcast. In this episode, I talked to Kimberly Hunt, who many people might know as Slay the GOP on TikTok, Instagram, and now Blue Sky. Kim's someone that I've seen on social media for quite a while, really breaking down the idiocracy of the right-wing sort of influencers on social media, breaking down their arrogance, hypocrisy, lack of knowledge, pseudo-truths, everything in between in a very compelling way in short-form content, which I think is really cool and really effective. But I got in contact with Kim because she had been sharing these stories of vulnerable children within the system that either went missing in large amounts or were unfortunately killed as a result of their home situation, despite numerous calls about their well-being and how the system has failed them. We talk about that. We talk about Kim's personal connection and personal experience with these sorts of systems and how much they fail vulnerable youth as well as fail them once they age out of the system. We talk about that. We talk about some of the policy failures. We talk about why there's so much dehumanization when it comes to one of the most vulnerable groups you could imagine in vulnerable youth or youth within abusive homes or neglectful homes or within the foster system or everything in between. So we dive into that, dive into a couple of stories that I'll have in the links below that you'll hear us reference, as well as some policy related articles and analysis from some organizations to kind of look at. We touch on at the end just kind of how Kim got into this sort of punditry of breaking down right-wing influencers and commentators online and how that kind of blew up for her in a big way through her social media profiles. And yeah, it's a great conversation. It is bleak. I don't do trigger warnings or anything of that nature, but I do want to say that this is a bleak conversation. It's an honest conversation about the failures of the system for children, but I think it's an important one for people to hear and definitely something that doesn't get covered enough in sort of the news spaces and podcast spaces from what I've seen. So I really appreciate Kim taking time out of her day to come on and do this with me. I really appreciate everybody chiming in on the podcast lately. It seems like we've had quite a few more listeners over the past couple of weeks. So I do encourage everyone to follow on all social media at The Powerless Pod. Email me at thepowerlesspod@gmail.com if you want to be on the show. If you are a musician, I talk to a lot of musicians about their music as well as advocacy and social issues. I talk to journalists, talk to political commentators like Kim here and producers and everything in between. So if you hear this and you would want to come on, whether you have pieces to talk about, topics to talk about, music you want to breakdown, things of that nature, definitely reach out in all those places. We also do have a website where you can find all of the episodes that have been released. It's thepowerlesspod.com. There you can find, like I said, the latest episodes, the news pieces from the newsletters, both from Substack and the New Metal Agenda. The merch store, we've got things like what the logo is in the back on all kinds of things and a few other designs that the designer for a lot of stuff, Steph, has done a great job on. So definitely check those things out there. And I guess that's it as far as the plugs go, right? Yeah. So thanks for listening, especially since we are talking about children in this episode and vulnerable children. When I'm doing intros, when I have time to do the intros for some of these episodes before I quickly compile them together as best I can and put them out for people to hear, I do want to continue to plug and encourage people to look into organizations to try to still help out vulnerable, starving, injured Palestinians in Gaza, primarily children in a lot of these instances when it comes to starvation and injuries. I was going to get into this with Kim, but it didn't really work into the conversation. But, we've seen reporting, of course, of children in Gaza are now have the highest amount of amputees that are children within Gaza in the world in modern history. People are starving every day. People are dying from starvation every day. And as our political leaders on all sides of the aisle in the United States, in the UK, and a lot of other Western countries fail to meet the moment, even when they try to pretend like they're going to do something like recognize a Palestinian state, which should have already happened years ago, and without all of these conditions and ridiculous dehumanization tactics that they do in order to qualify a Palestinian state, they're doing nothing to help the children in Gaza in a real way by confronting the Israeli government, IDF, and the state as a whole in this ongoing live stream genocide. So I do want to plug, again, these organizations that you can find from a website that I'll have at the bottom from the cut, which has a great list of resources. We've got Reviving Gaza, which distributes filtered water, hot meals, and dry food parcels to victims of the war. It also offers cash aid to Gazans. There's Amal for Palestine, which provides financial help, supplies, water, and meals to people in North Gaza. There's a Samir Project, which did say recently that it is currently unable to feed Gazans because it can't find food, but the group still is providing water, tents, and medications to people on the ground. There's Gaza Soup Kitchen, which provides meals to displaced families by sourcing ingredients from remaining farms in North Gaza. There's Dignity for Palestine, which supports displaced Gazans with food parcels, clean water, and medications. There's, of course, Oxfam, which works with local partners to provide a wide range of humanitarian aid and is fundraising to scale up its response wherever it's allowed. There's World Central Kitchen, which this one, again, is a little iffy, but again, they're providing food. All organizations are welcome at this point. World Central Kitchen, which has resumed a top meal service in Deir al-Balah Field Kitchen. There's UNICEF USA, which is on the ground providing services, including clean water, nutrition treatment, and cash aid to children and their families. And Save the Children, which is partnering with local groups to provide nutritional support, essential medical services, and basic supplies. So the link for that will be below as well, to where you can find these vetted organizations, because I do understand that people are wary of the amount of scammers and unfortunately con artists online that are trying to impersonate desperate people and trying to get a cash grab, although there are many, many legitimate people doing the same exact thing that are just starving and desperate in Gaza. But I do understand that, so that's where it's good to find these vetted organizations that are doing good work within Gaza, or trying to provide advocacy, trying to provide something to better the lives of the most oppressed and vulnerable population in the world right now. So with that, make sure to look at those links. I do encourage you to look at that below. Donate if you can, and if not, spread the word. But with that, we'll get into the episode with Kimberly Hunt, Slay the GOP on social media on the Powerless Podcast. Thanks so much for listening. All right, I'm here for the next episode of the Powerless Podcast with Kim Hunt, who is out of Arizona, someone that I followed on social media for quite a while, actually, now from your, where I think a lot of people find you on socials is from your awesome and usually very calm takedowns of some of the dumbest people on the internet, which is absolutely fantastic. I know I always ask beforehand, but, how have things been for you lately with all the stuff you've been covering? Just how are you doing today?
I'm doing good. There's a lot to cover. I think the state of the U.S. and the world, quite frankly, is chaotic, as we all know. So just trying to keep up with all of it and keep my sanity.
Yeah, kind of before we get into, primarily what we want to talk about today is some of the videos that you put out. I was really kind of impressed that you were kind of on this topic the way you are. That doesn't really get covered, I feel like, the way it should on news sources and socials and influencers and everything in between, which is, the vulnerability of children within the system, some of the most vulnerable within our population. So I got in contact with you. I thought there's no one better to kind of talk to about this. The more I dug, I realized like you had a very, personal connection with this as well, that I think that's probably why you're able to be so poignant with it in such like a, short form way that like gives a lot of information, which I really appreciate. So before we dive into all of that and some of these articles you shared, as well as some of the like the policy related things that would be related to a kind of big picture as well, how did I'm just curious, because I always ask people when I see them kind of stumble into this, like, political pundit, political commentator, whatever word you want to throw out there, space, like, how did that first come about for you?
Well, politics kind of dictates every facet of our lives. And, for me, the older I got, it was about knowing that life doesn't really operate the way conservatives seem to think it does. I was raised by conservative Christian people who woke up and watched Fox News at like 5 a.m. And I remember having discussions about abortions and gay marriage and interracial couples. And just the older I got and going to college and understanding that you can't be pro-life and then force someone to have children, and then these children grow up unloved, unwanted, uncared for because their parents were never able to take care of them. And then that's how you produce criminals. That's how you produce broken human beings. And then it's cyclical. Then you have generational trauma. And if you could prevent that from happening, why wouldn't you?
I grew up in a very conservative Christian household. I was very much, thrown into everything from pro-life to the evangelical. I mean, it seems like you kind of know where that's all coming from. And just kind of when you're able to reflect, reflect on it or become an adult or just have a little bit more of your own identity, you start to just like feel like the pieces are missing. And then it
Mhm.
really kind of drives you nuts because you don't know what you believe and you kind of have to have like a big it's almost like deprogramming in a way of like
It's
what is reality.
deconstructing, yeah.
Yeah, like 100%. And you've done such a good job of that. But again, like the way I got in contact with you to kind of do this is you've been sharing, at least there was two videos of, some of the articles that I had shared over that you kind of referenced in your videos about some of the major crises that are going on with vulnerable children within the system. One article was, with numerous children in North Dakota. Another one was a specific child that was unfortunately murdered after numerous calls from various people. I guess for you, and again, I don't want to make you kind of give too much of your personal life or whatever you're comfortable delivering here, but like coming from the system of this a little bit, when you see these articles before we get into the details here, and when you see kind of, it feels like the term of like invisible children a little bit in our society, how does that relate a little bit to what you were referencing with your upbringing? And is that why you're more passionate with this kind of topic, or do you feel like you kind of have a more vested personal interest in it? Just kind of speak to that a little bit.
Yeah, and well, the thing with the children missing in North Dakota, there's a couple of factors. So there's the fact that, a lot of these children, I mean, like they're being considered runaways and half of them are indigenous. And so that's an issue in and of itself. And just because children are classified as runaways doesn't necessarily mean that they're safe. You don't
Right.
know who's manipulating them, you don't know who's grooming them. So I think that they should be treated as abductions until proven otherwise. But for me, it stems from the fact that I was removed from my father when I was like 11 years old, and I was placed in the care of my aunt and uncle. And I think that if they were genuinely vetted, I would not have been placed in their care. And there was a period of time in high school where their son tried to sexually abuse me in my sleep. And this was when I was in high school. And I had spoke up for myself. I said, hey, like I woke up to your son in my room at 1 a.m. What are you going to do about it? Well, they made me pack up my bags and they dropped me off at CPS. So I was living in group homes and foster homes for about a month. And I was reunified with my aunt and uncle in the same household that my cousin still lived in. So I'm aware that they seem to think reunification is what defines their success, when
Yeah.
success should be defined by the safety and the well-being of the child. So I think that's where a little bit of my advocacy stems from. It's speaking for the voiceless.
Yeah, and that kind of framework, as I mentioned to you, I don't talk about it a ton on this show just because I've had people try to find, when there's been some conversations that I've done in the past on Gaza and things like that, I've had people kind of try to find, doxing or, but now I don't care. But as a special education teacher, you would see that a lot when you would have to do, we can get into a little bit of what a mandated reporter is in the instance of, the other case we're going to talk about, but. You would hear both when I was growing up and knew of some people that anecdotally that were definitely in similar situations as what you're talking about. And when here at CPS in Illinois, the Child Protective Services would be called. I always remember being told, like, regardless, like there was one instance where they said they would not remove the children in this clearly neglectful household because each kid had a bed, and that was like the line they had, that therefore that's better than removing them from the situation, right? There's kind of these, it's kind of viewed as the best thing possible is to keep children at all times with the family, or to keep them with a, in the case that you're talking about with yourself, with a family member, and not
Mhm.
really looking at the child's rights. It seems like we're in a time where parents' rights are at the forefront, or certain other things that people will talk about, and then no one's talking about the rights of a child and their safety, right? And you brought that up again in the instance of North Dakota. Half of these children are indigenous or tribal youth. You talk about the runaways, and I liked something that I read kind of about this case of these 11, at least 11 children going missing in North Dakota, ranging from ages 3 to 19. They talked about this runaway situation, and one person noted that if somebody runs away 20 times and comes back, that doesn't mean the 21st time that they're going to return or that they're safe or it's the same sort of situation. So as someone that kind of knows a little bit about this, you mentioned it earlier, but like that runaway dynamic, how, from your perspective, from your advocacy or what you know about this, how proliferated is that in these instances where so much of this gets dismissed as runaways or things of that nature?
Well, that's the problem you pointed out. Most of them aren't even reported, you know? And then, like, why are they running away? What is their household situation that they're running away from? There's so many questions.
Yeah, and like I guess I'm struggling a little bit with like the specific question on this because it's just so bleak, in a systemic way. But when it comes to specifically with indigenous and tribal youth, which we do see everything from different areas of just total neglect from the system, like you said, not even being reported, documented. Have you seen, and kind of when you focus on these things, a disproportionality there of like the system, an already failing system's larger failure with indigenous, brown, or even, like any like marginalized group in general when it comes
Yeah,
to kind
I
of
mean,
covering children advocacy?
have you heard of missing white woman syndrome?
I have. Yes.
Yeah. So, I mean, the fact that that is a classification tells you everything that you need to know. But with Native Americans specifically, there's historical and systemic violence, there's dehumanization and racial bias, there's violence inflicted on Native peoples, and then there's poor communication and trust. There's a lack of trust between law enforcement and indigenous communities, and that can lead to underreporting and reluctance to share information. And then on the tribal lands, they even have their own subset of like laws and their own cops and their own jurisdictions. So it gets a little complicated.
Yeah, absolutely. I know that's a much more complicated issue when it comes to kind of that all the different governmental dynamics there. But I guess at large with this, like, do you think with the amount of, I was thinking about this earlier today with being at work today with some of the students that I work with, of kind of this, we've had this tokenization in some ways of this topic, not of people in the system, because it's not an easy like grab for them to talk about, but we constantly hear a larger sect of political discourse from right wingers or from America at large about, I'm going to say like save the children type of aspects of this need of needing to focus on children's safety. And it tends to be boiled down to like their pet issues of anti-trans or anti-immigrant, or believing that like the Sound of Freedom movie is like a documentary, or all these different things. And yet it seems like there's no, from the left wing perspective or more progressive advocates, I you can tell me I'm wrong, but like I also don't see a big coalition there that really focuses on these issues. So I guess like politically, because that would be the overarching way to handle this countrywide, because it's a countrywide issue, not just in North Dakota or Arizona where you're from, also in Illinois or quote unquote liberal states. Like, why do you think that, it's probably an easy answer, but why do you think that this topic of, some of the most vulnerable, some of the most marginalized people that all people across the aisle claim to care about, why do you think the reality of how dire the situation is with children in the system, why do you think that is so neglected and really encapsulates that term of invisible children?
I think it's because they know focusing on things like trans people, is such a non-issue. And they deflect because it's easier to distract people than it is to address the real issues. So, under the guise of protecting children by eliminating trans athletes, you're still removing their health care. You're still removing every social safety net that they need to survive. And then that's like, you can't claim to want to remove crime, by posting on Truth Social at 3 a.m. that homeless people need to evacuate, when the true way to eradicate crime would be to give people the resources that they need to survive, because then people won't have to, resort to committing crimes to have basic necessities. You will have children that grow up with their basic needs, and then they don't have to live a life of crime.
Yeah, it seems like it would be a pretty you wish it would be a universal topic. One issue people could coalesce around, that like children should be, not neglected, cared for, and supported. But
Hmm.
here we are. It kind of goes into, this case. I felt like as a school worker, and again a mandatory reporter, the other article or the other story you've talked about recently, this was, if I remember, this was in Arizona, correct? Of
Yes,
Rebecca Baptiste, I think it would be her last name.
Baptiste, yeah.
For people that are unfamiliar with this, do you mind kind of giving a little bit of a summary of the story and we kind of break down where the system failed this child?
Yeah, I'm trying to remember if she was 11 or no, she was 11 or 14. But essentially, her school was reporting for 8 months that they had suspected she was being abused. And then on July 27th, she was found unresponsive. And then I believe on July 29th or the 30th, she had passed away. And so she was failed. She had been investigated multiple times and then was still left in the care of her father and his girlfriend. And now she's dead.
Yeah, and was, by all accounts, I mean, murdered. And from what I could read, it was. I think you said it correctly that about 13 times the school, mandated reporters, administrators, etc., had reported this glaring signs, that you could point out to, that we could rattle off for hours. But in this instance, the school and mandated reporters were doing what they're supposed to, right? Like, they are
Mhm.
reporting, they are showing concern, and yet nothing is done. And so I guess to you, like, both for myself or other people that work with children or just anyone that's concerned about this, like, do you see that as a failure solely of CPS? Are there things that people that work with school children can do more when the system fails them? Like, I just don't know. I know it's a tough question to ask you, but it just feels so much like even when you do the right thing, nothing can be done.
Right? I mean, due to legal reasons, a school can only do so much. They
Right.
report and they follow up, they can advocate for the child. You can't force CPS to care. But, and it's not to say that every caseworker doesn't care, but, someone needs to be held accountable because I believe this was investigated at least 6 times. And the fact that each time she was still left in the care of her family and now she's dead just shows that this was completely preventable. So part of it is needing to invest in these systems. We need to give these CPS workers more of an incentive, but they also need a reduction of their caseload so that they have the capacity to handle these types of things. But they can't cut back on those caseloads unless we have more people willing to take on this kind of work. I know one person who went to school to be a caseworker, got her master's in it, and she would rather work at Chick-fil-A. There is someone that I know has a master's degree in casework and social work, and she opted out and chose to work at Chick-fil-A because it's mentally taxing.
Yeah, I think that's kind of the tough. That's like almost the insurmountability of this is, the system's failing these kids. That kids that should be alive are dying because their rights are not put at the forefront before parents or before reunification. That's the buzzword they use over and over again to act like it's a success. But it just feels like even funding, right? I believe that's an issue for every social program, social safety net, welfare, etc. But the burnout is also real there as well, right? I've talked to people that have worked as case managers, or case workers rather, at CPS or other public services for social workers, or in schools as an example.
Mhm.
And you could fund to a certain degree, but it's also the very systems in place that would fail, that don't just need reform, they need complete restructuring, right? I guess, that's what are your kind of thoughts on that? Like, I guess, like, what are some things that need to be done for these more vulnerable children that people can, with Rebecca or with a lot of other children that have a very similar story? How can people make change without policy from the ground up on this? Like, is there voluntary, are there organizations you've seen that are able to assist children further in this, or is it really like a systemic issue within the country, both on a social, societal, and policy level?
I think there's a combination of both. Obviously, if you could donate food and you can donate clothing, I think that would help families immensely. I think that children ending up in foster care is completely preventable. I think a lot of the times it's due to financial strain. And if families had access to healthcare or to education or to public transit so that, parents can get to jobs, or if we had affordable or free childcare so that the parent can go to work and not have to worry about who's going to watch their child. There's so many ways that we can prevent children from ending up in the system to begin with.
Yeah, and that kind of goes into these policy questions you're talking about, which I always believe in as well. It's more of there's only so much you can do when the situations are that dire. In the case of this child in Arizona, but we've seen, as it gets into a little bit of policy, we've seen recently cuts to all sorts of things from the Trump administration. I'm sure in Arizona you might see that on a statewide level as well. In Illinois, even policymakers here in a quote unquote very liberal state government are talking about that the federal cutting is going to have insurmountably negative effects on an already completely dire situation here when it comes to vulnerable children within the system as well. I shared over this thing from a media outlet called First Focus that talks about the children account for 23% of the U.S. population, but received under 9% of federal funding in 2024. Proposed budgets would slash funding for Medicaid, CHIP, SNAP, child welfare. Not to continue to be bleak on this, because I do want to at some point find the real stakes are with that when these new policies come into place. Some of them around next year are supposed to really come in to be implemented. Some of them we're already looking at least like staff cutting in preparation for this. Like, do you see from these cuts a drastic change for the worse for children in the situation and social services, or just kind of what's your perspective on that?
Yeah, I do think so. I think it's going to impact children who are autistic or have special needs, and hospitals are going to close inevitably. It's going to be a real domino effect. And, this also impacts people who age out of the foster care system. I don't think people are aware of how many end up homeless because once they age out, they don't get those safety nets. And well, those safety nets are going to be gone regardless at some point. But they end up homeless and then they turn to crime. And then, children are born in situations that are not exactly ideal, and then it happens all over again. It's a repetitive cycle, so it's going to be real bad.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's the crux of it. Unfortunately, Republicans have talked about these largest cuts ever to support for children. We've seen even one of the big things from this most recent administration is them talking about trying to ban states from providing free breakfast and lunch to students in public school. I guess you being in, I would ask this just because I know you're in Arizona. You probably see this a lot more directly than I do, although I live in a very conservative part of Illinois. But do you perceive people when these things come in, the sort of societal impact that it'll have on children, public schools, the overall welfare of their neighborhoods? Do you see people, regardless of their political ideology, actually realizing and rectifying with the ramifications of this? Do you believe that a positive out of this could be people getting smacked in the face of reality of what these programs do and how much they support children? Or do you believe that this will continue down this path for a lot of folks kind of on the conservative movement or just Americans in general?
It's really hard to say. I mean, I live in Scottsdale, so it's a bunch of people who vote in their best interests and they vote for their pockets at the end of the day.
Right.
I know if I were still living in a community like Tucson, I think people would understand the impact. And I think that's why Tucson primarily votes blue.
Yeah. I mean, I guess, yeah, I guess I fail to, and I guess this is just kind of me speaking out loud, but I fail to comprehend. I get Republican or even, some of this quote unquote centrist liberals or whatever that you can see around. I get them and the political power dynamic space of continuing down these buzzword to bring this down, because people hear big government, they just want to cut it because that's the ideology. It's all about autocracy. It's all about pulling yourself up by your bootstraps. I have just a rough time even growing up in a conservative household or living in a conservative area that I do now. I have a rough time understanding the dehumanization, that can come from that, of lauding it as a success that children are going to lose food, or children are not going to have health care, or be left to the wolves when it comes to a dire situation in a household, or whatever I could ramble these off over and over again. Do you like, I don't know, just like, do you understand, or can you even comprehend like where that comes from for so many of these people? Like, it's just like, you can have these buzzwords online, but like the reality day to day just feels like I just can't comprehend it.
I think you nailed it when you said it. At the end of the day, it's dehumanization. And I think a prime example of that would be this argument that people who are on food stamps shouldn't be allowed to get, soda and junk food and unhealthy things, but they don't complain about it when rich people have the luxury of indulging in it. They just don't want poor people to enjoy things in life.
Yeah, it's the old adage of like when they would kind of talk about, someone in Section 8 housing has food stamps or whatever the case may be, but they have a smartphone. It's like it's such a ridiculous. It's like, do you want them to be able to get a job? You need a phone. Like, I just, even like that elementary of a thing, and it just feels like we're at this point in this country that has been there. To be fair, it's been there for years, but it just feels like people let their freak flag fly of just like absolute depravity, of just like being gleeful about it. And that's something that like kind of is more unsettling to me than a lot of typically abhorrent reactionary conservative aspects of movements we've seen over the years. That now it's like, it feels that the point is, what's the old, like the saying, like the cruelty is the point. Like, it's not even about this idea of bringing down some deficit or debt or some talking point they'll use. It's literally to say, yes, we don't want you to have food stamps. We don't want you to have access to healthcare or childcare. It's like, not to bring it to there's a little off topic, but it's kind of all connected. Is like the idea that Zoran Mamdani's primary race was people should be able to ride a bus to be able to go to work, and people should be able to have childcare, and that's viewed as like abhorrent and like demonic to people. It just feels so out of the realm of reality.
I was literally going to bring that up because a couple weeks ago, this woman made a video and she was like, as a moderate who used to lean left, I have to chime in on this. And she goes on to say that if Zohran Mamdani enacts public transit to be free, it's going to be very harmful for women's safety.
I saw that exact talking point. Yeah, absurd.
And I was like, I can assure you, it is far more dangerous for a woman to have to walk the streets of New York late at night because she couldn't afford public transit. It's way more dangerous for that to happen than to have to sit next to a homeless person.
Yeah, it's kind of the jokes that you would even hear from, I wouldn't even say like comedians that don't even have the best politics or something, where they would kind of talk about, it's like, you're on the subway. If someone's acting weird, you ignore them or you go to the next car. Like, it's not the same as somebody not being able to afford public transit. It's like these people are trying to act like the like proliferation of strong men or strong people, and then they're afraid of like cities. It's truly bizarre.
And it's like, if you don't want to share these spaces with homeless people, then you should be advocating for them to have ways to get to work. This is how you give them reliable transportation. You give them that assurance of never having to worry about whether they can afford to get to work or not.
Yeah, or again, mental health services, home, all these things, and it's like, I don't know, it's the quintessential thing of conservative people creating a problem in their head to be super upset about and creating real policy, right? Like, and it goes back to, we're here primarily to talk about these aspects of children, but all of that is related in my view, of like, do they not realize there's homeless kids? Do they not realize there's homeless
it's
women?
all interconnected. And I think the problem is that a lot of people view homelessness as like a moral failing. And the difference between most people is that homeless people didn't have a family to fall back on. But I think a majority of us are like 2 or 3 paychecks away from being homeless if we were to lose our jobs. That's just the state of the economy right now. And I think a lot of people lack that perspective.
Yeah. Well, they also now just seem like I forget, what was the term that I saw a bunch of, like, it was like politicians as well as pundits like Charlie Kirk and all those people saying it was toxic empathy. It was like this term they were throwing out there, that empathy, which that could be a term people can justifiably use in a real context, but in the context they're talking about, it's like actually just like caring about somebody that is, an immigrant or homeless or, a child in the system or whatever the case may be. And instead of coming up with, you don't even have to come up with it. The policies are there. Like, these things exist, give kids food, give people health care, give people a roof over their head. And all of these things are so connected and so correlated that it's like, if you ignore all these things, treat them as singular issues, and then just beat people over the head with that it's their fault, or in the aftermath of like this horrific murder of this child, as an example, they'll go, oh, that's awful, and then not critically think about how this was one of the most like avoidable circumstances of all time,
Right. Well, rather than advocate for these children, they'd rather advocate for their Second Amendment rights. So,
Yeah, that's right. Yeah. Guns should have more rights than children or individuals in this country by and large, I guess. But yeah, to harp on that a little bit more, I guess, like, as we're into the Trump administration, I just bring this up because, you're someone that is able to break these things down so well as it comes to this. What do you think the platform should be, or what are some aspects, I guess we've kind of talked about them, for like a Democrat, left-wing, liberal, et cetera, platform going forward to make sure that things like this don't happen again? Because again, I believe in, a lot of mass organizing, trying to have, organizational tools outside of the kind of electoral political sphere, because I think both parties really do not to equate them, but do fail the most marginalized through almost all terms or all administrations. What are some things that need to be at the forefront to make sure that these things do get better for these children, whether it's a tribal or indigenous population, or so in the case of this young woman or young girl in Arizona? What do you think are some actual policy tools these people should promote that would probably be effective and also popular when it comes to the next administration, if they can actually pull it off?
yeah, I mean, they're going to have tangible, impactful policies, so school lunches, public transit. I would probably say, I already touched on this, but, protecting kids as they age out of the system, giving them the resources that they need to guide them through the next phases of their life, affordable housing. I think that's one of the main ones right now. As someone who lives in Arizona, I remember when I want to say I was a sophomore in college looking for apartments, and a luxury apartment was $800. And the same apartment that I would have been looking at back then is now $1,400.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, the affordability, I think, is just paramount in a lot of this stuff in general. But I mean, when it comes specifically, I guess, going back into a little bit of the nitty gritty of like the actual system of this, do you believe, like, I guess we touched on this already, I don't mean to be so cyclical, but do you believe that when it comes to the actual social worker aspect, because at the end of the day, that is who, we're talking about also like children in actual crisis, right? We can talk about the proactive solutions of food, housing, the typical and correct progressive talking points. But when it comes to these situations, like, what can be done to where a kid isn't, they're not called from people that work with them day in and day out 13 times or whatever it was about this kid is having issue, they're running away numerous times, they're going home, and then they finally die as a result of it. Like, do you really see like there's something specific that we can do within the child protective system that can kind of like tip the scales a little bit to where these kids are actually like helped out a little bit more as a result from being within the system?
I mean, I think it boils down to investing in protection and not reaction, right?
Yeah.
So I don't know, it's tough because and this is where I think you could get Democrats and Republicans to align is if you break it down from like a budget standpoint, for example, if you were to fund community-based prevention programs so that families can get help before children enter foster care, it costs less than foster care and it prevents trauma. If it prevents trauma, it prevents so many issues moving forward.
Yeah, like the best situation is to not have the situation happen in the first place, right? I guess that's the tough reality sometimes, and maybe you can tell me I'm wrong, is when you see these stories is the failure was years in the making, right? Like we could talk about what could have been done after people get called in. We can talk about how they fail to classify, certain runaways in certain instances, or the stigma with certain populations. But at the end of the day, it is the failure of proactivity to kind of build up community that ultimately is the failure, right? Well, thanks for breaking a lot of this down for me. I'm sure this is going to be a somewhat bleak conversation for a lot of people to hear, but I think it's really needed and something I don't see talked about as much as it probably should be. So I appreciate you kind of breaking that down and talking with me. I guess, like, when it comes to, hang on, I had this pulled up here real quick. When it comes to, like, I'm trying to think here. Do you think, like, let's see. Okay. When it comes to, like, the community-based services for things like this for children or just people in general, we were talking about homeless populations, whatever the case may be. Do you feel like in your situation in Arizona or other places, do you think that, like, that can be solved on a more, can I guess, like, what you've seen outside of the system? Do you believe that there's, like, volunteer work that can be done? Have you seen organizations that kind of do work to kind of prevent these sort of things or kind of build up communities in the way that the government has failed? I guess I'm trying to end this on a little, or not end this, but kind of talk about this on a little bit of a positive note of what you think some positives can be of what you've seen of community-based things or organizations, or if there's not, like, if you're just not seeing kind of the work being done on the ground,
Yeah, I mean, I remember when I was a kid, I had a big sister from like the Big Brother Big Sisters program, and I think that that kind of gives children an escape from the chaos of their life.
Right.
And then, like there's like after school and enrichment programs, and I think it would be great if sports could be free for children, because that gives children very much needed structure at a time where they don't have that luxury. I think that would be really impactful for them, and that gives them a sense of community that they probably don't have at home. I know that sports is probably what got me through high school, honestly, and it was, like, the only thing that I ever had to look forward to. Those are just some things I can think of off the top of my head.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. No, I mean, yeah, again, community-based things, whether it's extracurriculars or having more things funded in school, so it goes back to funding, unfortunately, or like the Big Brother Big Sister programs, all that stuff is great. So yeah, Kim, I thanks a lot for breaking a lot of that down. Again, I know it's not a fun thing to talk about, but I think it's an important thing to kind of talk about for people to hear. Kind of like to lighten things up here, again, and I'll have you kind of plug your things at the end here. But one thing, again, like I said at the beginning, where I think a lot of people, like, I put in the little Discord that I have that I was going to have you on, and so many of them were like, oh, I saw some, I found her on TikTok. I love how she breaks these things down and totally humiliates these people, and like a lot of times, like, you're very calm as they're like losing their minds and all red. I've seen everything from, I forget what the guy's name is, like the elder millennial guy, or the
That
one
boomer.
yeah. So you can tell I don't know these people's names for a reason. There's the one younger woman that I've only seen from your videos because I'm pretty sure I blocked her on everything. I think her name's Emily. Would like when you first got into doing this, did you see yourself kind of getting this big platform on this, or like where did kind of, I know I asked you this a little bit earlier, but like where do you think all that came from for you, that you're able to just like take these people that are screaming and feeling like they have such arrogance that they know everything, and you're just like able to basically go on and just break these things down and just destroy them in like a
Well,
30-second
genuinely,
clip?
like, the cognitive dissonance is so astounding, but I think I've always just been really articulate. I got a full ride to Arizona State, and I went to school for journalism.
Okay.
So I'd like to think I'm just kind of good with my words, but I remember like during like the Black Lives Matter movement and during COVID, and people would post stupid things about being anti-masks or, all lives matter. And I remember just being like the first person in someone's comment section, kind of ripping them to shreds. And then I had like transitioned to Facebook, or not Facebook, I transitioned to TikTok. And then I would see like really stupid arguments. And it was like, okay, I need to dismantle this.
Yeah.
So, I kind of was just like arguing into the void. And
Yeah.
then it clearly struck a chord with some people, and then it continued to grow. But a lot of the times it's me just feeling the need to debunk what these people are saying. And it's not necessarily that I'm coming for the person who said it, but it's the hundreds of people in the comments who agree with it, because that
Yeah.
terrifies me.
Yeah, I think that is the terrifying thing for me, because I see those things, because most of the time, again, for someone that tries to run a podcast in their off time, I don't consume as much of like the short form video content as a lot of other people. So when I do see it, it tends to be from like a left wing person, like I said, like you, like ripping ripping them to shreds in a funny way. And I guess like for a while I kind of viewed these people as probably having a big following of like hate watchers or just avid viewers, and then you look into it and it's like, no, there's people that think these people have like real political analysis, like, and as you said, I think that's the most terrifying thing. It's not so much somebody yapping on the internet, it's that there's like these people have like millions of followers and a massive, and get brought on these big podcasts and get brought on like these big media ventures and flown places and all these different things, and it's like I've never heard like more idiotic statements that can be like ripped to shreds by basic logic in my entire life. Like, it just feels like it's the weirdest echo chamber that I can't believe is real still, you know?
Yeah, I think that there is a major cognitive decline in this country, and a lot of people are being discouraged from going to college. And it's not that you can't be educated if you don't go to college, but I think people are being discouraged from asking questions and seeking out truth.
Yeah, it's that old thing of, you know, you I think in COVID for me it was like a big thing of like where you realize, I've always believed it's great to be skeptical about everything, but if you're just like openly contrarian and cynical about like studies and facts and data, like that's a whole different ballgame, and people kind of feel like they're the smartest person in the room if they're not going along with what they perceive as the, you know, mainstream talking point, even though what they're discussing is like literally, especially now, the in line with like the government of the United States. Like, it's ironically the state propaganda in some ways
Yeah.
now, just kind of filtered through an influencer. Well, yeah, thanks, Kim, for going over this. I don't want to take too much more of your time today on this. I really appreciate you breaking that down, and also kind of ending it on a funner note of just kind of talking about the idiocracy that you get to cover on a day-to-day basis. Just kind of plug where people can find you and find what you've got going on through your socials and things of that nature.
Yeah. You can find me on Instagram and TikTok, Slay the GOP. I also recently made a Blue Sky account, which is also Slay the GOP. I'm trying to be better about upkeeping that. But yeah, aside from politics, I also like to talk about sports, so I'll mix things up here and there.
What are your sports teams? What are you a big follower of?
The Broncos, University of Arizona, basketball. I can be a football fan, but they tend to break my heart more often than not.
Yeah, as a Chicago Bears fan, I can feel that in my soul for the last like entirety of my existence. So I feel that big time.
Yeah, my best friend's a Bears fan, and I can't remember the last time she was happy. So
Yeah, no, it's pretty brutal. It really makes you like just appreciate anything else but professional sports. But all right, thanks so much for doing this, Kim. I really appreciate your time, and I hope you have a great rest of your night.
Yeah, you as well.